to the podcast Tea in the Desert. Joining me on the podcast today is the founder of a company that he sold to Zomato at 21 years of age. And then followed on by scaling some of the most successful companies in Australia, most recently being OpenPay in the buy now, pay later space. And then he followed on to advising some of Australia's highest net worth families, both in Australia and globally. And now he's shifting his focus to a very exciting new project in the sustainability space. And now, without further ado, please welcome Michael Bronfman. Michael,
thanks, boys.
On,
thank you very much. All good.
Welcome.
All good. What an intro. I tell you what, I mean, that's going to be hard to beat if I ever host a podcast, that's for sure.
You know that, eh?
Yeah. So awesome. Thanks for the intro. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today.
No worries. I'm glad I'm able to join, and you know, this is actually one of first of many podcasts, and so I'm pumped about this. Let's go, boys.
We're so keen. We're so
Awesome.
keen, and we're finally happy that we can sit down and do this. We've been talking about this for
a while.
I know.
2 months.
It's been a while. You know what it's like running a business, as you know, it gets a bit
man.
busy, and ultimately, you know, finding the time to do this is very rare. So I'm glad we managed to get together.
Keen.
And it's a Friday, right? So, you know.
It's Friday, man.
That's
We just got to enjoy it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So let's get straight into the icebreaker, just so we can get a little bit, to know a little bit about yourself.
Yep.
And here it is, yeah? You have a really busy day, right? With 2 events. One in the morning and one in the afternoon. It's a networking event in the morning, and then you have a party at night. You go clubbing, wherever you want to go. Who or what do you introduce yourself as in both events? Both in the networking event, where Michael wants to make a bit of money and make some connections, and at night, where he's looking to let loose and kick back and etc. What do you introduce yourself as?
Awesome. Great question. I think for me, let's talk about the party side, right? Because it's funny, a lot of my friends and a lot of people in my network would be like, Mikey, I don't even know what you do, because I do so many different things, right? And so part of the things I do, number one is currently I've got a very exciting sustainability project which I'm working on, which we'll touch on. Beyond that, I invest in different companies, both early stage, late stage, and always very focused on personal development and doing a lot of advisory work for some boards, but, particularly in the tech space. And so, to answer that question is very difficult in like a one sentence, but I think, what's really exciting about that question is the fact that you mentioned network. And I think we all know that there's nothing more important than your network and ultimately your reputation in the market, because the market's very small and people know people, and there's nothing more important with the network. And I think part of, running the businesses I've run in the past is, I always keep in touch with the people that matter in my life. And I think, for business, there's nothing more important than bringing the right people into the business and help you. And so I think
network is net worth, right?
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. So, awesome question, boys.
Would you call yourself an entrepreneur? So if someone came up to you and said, hey, what do you do? I'm an entrepreneur.
Not really. Like, I think for me, it's entrepreneur is like a word that a lot of people tend to use very widely,
bio, right?
in their bio. And it's like, what's an entrepreneur? Ultimately, for me, it's about, the long-term goal. And I know this is very cliche and everyone says it, is live life on your own terms, right? And I think for me, what's important is doing something you love and waking up in the morning knowing that you're making a difference, number one, but also it doesn't feel like work, right? Because you love doing it and you're good at it and you're good at it. And I think being, fairly being 30 made me realize discovering myself over the past 10 to 15 years to understand really what I'm good at. And one thing I'd have to say, I know I'm delving a lot about not being direct on the question, but one thing I'd have to say is that, being young, don't get married to your job, is really understand, give a go to different things and different elements, and then come up with ultimately what you feel you're really good at, and then leverage off that, and then bring other people that are good at what they do into the business to amplify the results, And so that's, to answer your question, entrepreneurship is all about problem solving, right? And to be able to problem solve, you bring people that are best at what they do, they know what they're talking about. It's like, I know this sounds a bit funny, but it's like saying, going to an accountant, for example, asking them for medical advice. You wouldn't do that, right? And, you know, having 3 degrees, going through school, etc., I've never agreed with the element of, you know, for example, being taught legal studies by a teacher, someone who learned how to be a teacher, but not someone who's experienced lawyer, right? Who's actually experienced and so forth.
Go out
and
in
so
the
on.
real world.
Correct.
And put yourself to the test.
Absolutely.
Fail, you know.
Yeah, and I think for me, the way I develop and continue to develop is studying the best of the best in areas that I'd like to know and become better at, rather than people who haven't experienced it, if that makes sense.
And on that point, on entrepreneurship anyway,
Yeah.
it's something, unfortunately, that is not taught in school,
No.
not taught in universities, or rarely is anyway.
Yeah.
But the other point is that now I feel like that word, like Danny was saying, is completely, you know, taken out of context now.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people, you'll find that, you know, as soon as they start, I don't know, a Shopify store now, they call themselves an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Or they resold, a pair of shoes.
Yeah.
You know, Yeezys
At a
or whatever
profit.
it may be, at a profit, $10 profit, boys. I'm an entrepreneur, right? It's
It's a pride thing though, right?
Yeah.
Like people think, you know, an ego thing.
Yeah,
Right? It's almost
yeah.
like becoming an entrepreneur, it's just, man, like I'm a business owner. I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel good about it.
It's
But
almost, yeah.
sometimes you just got to get back down to basics, and you know what's the point of businesses?
Yeah.
Business is to help provide I'm talking about a service-based business.
solve a
Absolutely.
Provide solve a problem.
For sure.
Yeah.
So be that support.
Yeah.
Help that person. Have that sort of mindset.
Yeah.
Then you'll start to think differently.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing a big shift in the way business is run traditionally. And I think, you know, having consulted for some of the highest net worth families in Australia, who majority of them are, you know, beyond 50s or 60s, who have done extremely well for themselves through old money, you can see a very big shift in the way businesses are run and the way people are doing things. And I think a lot of, unfortunately, the young generation, being me and other people, is, you know, entrepreneurship is thrown out as if it's a cool word, right? Yeah. And yeah, great, throw it around is a cool word, but ultimately, what value are you bringing across to people? Okay? And that's what business is about, is what problem and what solutions are you coming up with that are beyond your lifetime, you know, that are going to bring value beyond just your existence.
And so generations beyond that.
Absolutely.
Of course,
And so ultimately that's what you want to create, is that legacy, and I think is very important.
And that's how, you know, I guess we're going to cover this later on, is how you raise capital.
Yeah.
Is by, you know, selling, and not hey, I'm an entrepreneur, I've got a really cool idea.
No.
But, you know, much deeper than
Selling value.
Absolutely. Yeah. The VC landscape is an interesting one, and looking forward to touching on that. But ultimately, you know, I think the VC landscape, venture capital, for those that don't know, is startups are very much fairly newish term, you know, and I think it's ever evolving. And I think in Australia particularly, we're moving in the right direction from a startup perspective and VCs. And I think the other element to consider is the fact that, as we know, valuations of companies are certainly at its peak. And that comes across at, you know, property prices, and comes across in stock prices, and you're seeing that in the stock market at the moment. And so I think ultimately there's going to be big change, which I think we'll talk about in due course. But yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I think unless you understand the VC landscape and you're in that game, it takes a while to get your head around, you know? Yeah.
But let's start with yourself first,
Sure.
and I want to know a lot about who you've become and how, you know, and let's get back to basics. You know,
Yeah.
who was Michael when he migrated from
Sure.
a foreign country?
Yeah.
I'll let you sort of explain that.
Yeah.
And, you know, what did you do when you were a young kid? I think you were 12 when you moved.
Yeah.
And what did you do as a kid, as a 12-year-old kid, to sort of become, you know, Michael today?
Sure. Okay. Awesome. So, I mean, it's a pretty lengthy story, and I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible. But, you know, born in Israel, and as you know, Israel's somewhat a war zone, so it was a very different lifestyle to Australia. Both my parents served in the army. My dad was in the Navy, my mum was in the Air Force, both fought wars, etc.
It's mandatory conscription up there.
Yeah, yeah, very, very different lifestyle to this. And so, I mean, to be honest, growing up was awesome, just because the culture and the way people integrate are very close, right? But I think there's a lot of lessons learned from that experience. And I think ever since from a young age, like started judo, for example, and competed in judo at an early age, from the age of 5 up to the age of 11. And I, you know, became Israel champion at that age. No one knows that about me.
Wow.
And so I think
that's awesome.
I've always been competitive, right? And, you know, funnily enough, my coach won the Olympics. And so I guess that comes back to like surrounding yourself with the best of the best, right?
I was wondering why you were so jacked. Like,
yeah, good question.
From a young age, it looks like.
It's genetics, let's say. No. But yeah, so I think from a young age, I've always been that competitive spirit in me. And, you know, certainly, you know, grew up in a family that was what we would call, I guess, middle class. So never sort of underprivileged or overprivileged. But I think growing up in Israel teaches you a lot of lessons, you know, and gives you, I guess, perspective as to how lucky we are, everyone is, to be living in a country that's not necessarily ever, touch wood, under threat.
Yeah.
But also opportunities are absolutely
everywhere.
Endless.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a cool, when you reflect back to where I started, that's a great sort of journey. Then beyond that, obviously came here, no English, you know, started at primary school at I think it was year 6 that I went to. I had to sort of repeat it, then went into high school.
Wow.
And then from there, I've always sort of started working at an early age. So my first job was at 14, where I sold, you know, telecommunication at Optus, for example. I've always,
14.
yeah, you know, 14 and 9 months or whatever the legal age was.
No way.
You know,
What was that push? How did you find yourself in that position?
I think, you know, like when you think about the position we were in, is my family risked a lot to literally leave everything behind. We've got a big family over there. So they left literally everything behind, came here, and, you know, that spirit of, you know, taking risks and having to look after yourself at the end of the day, because no one's going to look after yourself, is what interests me into getting into the workforce early stage. But I also recognize, you know, my parents, as, you know, good Jewish boy, wanted me to study and learn and go into university and blah, 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 right?
That's a fob mentality.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. And like when I look back at that fantastic experience and all that kind of stuff, but these days, does it matter? Not really, you know? And
but
so,
it molded you into who you are today.
Absolutely.
And I think it's easy to sort of forget to give credit to you know, our parents who risked everything to come here, and, you know, massive language barrier, especially with the Aussie accent as well. Like, it's hard, man. It's really hard, even down to the most basic things. Like, and like, if it wasn't for who you were back home and who your parents were back home, you know, it's hard to say. It's difficult to not give credit to that. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Do you remember when you were 12 and you had no idea on how to speak English? And what was communication like? What was life like when you were just going out and about? Yeah,
it's funny you say that, because it was so foreign, you know, and I'll never forget the day I stepped into the primary school to meet the principal for the first day.
Wow.
And I shook his hand and he said, "My name is Mr. Boys." And I had no idea what to say. I looked at him as if like he was an alien, right?
No way.
Because I didn't know what to say. I didn't understand the language or anything like that. The challenge then is, you know, 2 weeks later, you know, you've got the casual days at school where you come, they let you know a day before, there's a casual day tomorrow, whatever. You come, you donate $2. And you come in casual clothing. And I'm the only one rocking up in uniform because I didn't understand the language and I didn't know about it, right? But funnily enough,
there's always one kid and it was
always the one kid and it was me, you know?
He was different from day one.
Exactly. But actually that also gave me advantages. And what that gave me advantages, you know, I was the best basketball player, best soccer player at the school. And there's this new international kid coming in and everyone thinks he's the coolest kid on the block. And next thing is a month later, they write about me, about this kid that is the best basketball player in the newsletter, the school newsletter. And so even though it was like a bit of an awkward thing, I amalgamated into that school very well, and beyond that, I guess part of the reason, again, I stopped judo, for example, was because I didn't understand the language.
Yeah.
Now, 10 years later, the guy from Israel who competed in the Olympics last year, who came third or second, right? I used to beat him in judo. So imagine what would happen if I continued and blah, blah, blah. And so it's interesting where life takes you with the decisions that you make. Wow. I mean, opportunities are in front of your eyes all the time. And it's ultimately those decisions that will dictate what you do and where you go in life,
Of course.
And I think it's just important to just recognize and go back to, okay, this is why I did this and this is why I did that. And always never forget where you come from, I think is the most important part. Yeah.
It's so crazy that you said that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no one does. Yeah. You know what I mean?
So crazy.
Because it's not something I openly
imagine
talk about.
if you had continued, or imagine if you had, continued
exactly.
to train.
Yeah, but I am here today where I am because I haven't done those things, Yeah.
But, all credit to you, right?
Yeah.
Like you still, became a successful, business owner and an advisor, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I want to touch on something very quickly.
Sure.
Because I understand sort of military is an important thing in Israel.
Yeah.
And I just want to sort of understand what your family's take was on it. Was there ever an expectation on you to, follow the militaristic pathway?
Sure.
If any, or like, what do you think?
I think the first thing is because the country is always under attack.
Yeah.
Military is mandated, right? And so guys go to the military after school at 18, to 21, so 3 years.
Yeah.
And women usually go for 2 years.
So women as well.
Yeah, correct.
It's crazy.
I
think so. They have that in Egypt, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's women. I think men.
Men only.
It's men with brothers.
Yeah.
And if you have a sister, you don't go.
Correct.
Which is
crazy.
so strange. Yeah, exactly.
And the fact that Israel is a first world country, right? And majority of the funding goes to security. Goes to show and tells you a big story, right?
Exactly, of course.
And, so when you talk about the expectation, I think part of the reason that my parents came here is to give us the opportunity to live life rather than spend it in the military.
Yeah.
And again, there's a lot of risks involved and all that kind of stuff. And so there wasn't ever an expectation there of me going in there, even though they did.
Yeah.
And so, I think for me, even now, if I go back for longer than like a certain period of time, they sort of mandate that I stay back, So, there was never an expectation as such. And I think part of the reason they came here was to give us an opportunity that they didn't have.
Yeah, Yeah. That's so interesting. And I could talk about it all day long. But let's move on to who Michael was. He was working, it was at Optus, your first job?
Yeah, that was my first ever job.
At 14 and 9 months. So, day dot, you go straight to, What were you doing at Optus?
Just selling telecommunication at retail level. I did that for quite a bit of time while I was doing school because I've always wanted to earn money early stage, right? Which fortunately enough led me to investing in property very early age, which I think has put me in a very good position today. And, I think the earlier you can invest, and timing plays a big part in that, is the better it is. And so the fact that a lot of my friends were going out at 18 and all that kind of stuff, I was doing uni and working full time and trying to create a company at the same time, crazy, and it's like, I've always been that 7-day guy. And there's nothing more important, and this is probably cliche, than time management. We all have the same amount of time a day. It's how you utilize the time and how efficiently you utilize the time and what you do with that time. So
that's amazing.
To touch on, I guess, the point of starting early, working early, I've always been that person to sort of, try and make money early and being able to be as independent as possible as early on as possible.
So when you say you bought your first property as a young age, how old were you?
I was about 19. So I think it's fairly young. There's probably people that buy it a lot younger, but that was my first sort of breakthrough into the property market. It was a property in Ascot Vale, which I bought which was like a 10-minute, drive from the city.
That's mate. Try and buy an Ascoval now.
Yeah,
forget it, mate. You got a medium. But I don't know what the medium price is, but I wouldn't. 1.5 mil. That's
So I think for me it was all about trying to get independent, be as independent as possible, as early on as possible. I was never afraid. One thing I must say is I was never afraid of taking risks. Very different to someone like my dad, for example, who's been in IT for a long period of time. And
is that what he did when he came to Australia?
Yeah, so he worked for IBM, doing pretty well from IBM perspective. He managed a big project there.
That's awesome.
For West Farmers. But I think it's interesting how sort of like, and I look at the dynamic now that I've got kids as well, young kids, but how your family could be very different to the path you take.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I always found that intriguing.
But it's completely almost responsible for
it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, we live fairly sort of, similar lives, but different to some respect, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so, always go to him for advice and bounce ideas. Yeah. But I'm very big on sort of going to advice to the right people. To make sure it's the right advice to some respect. And I'll always make the decisions based on my ultimately gut feel and my due diligence, Exactly. But I'm never afraid to take risks. And I think that's one thing that you just can't succeed or do well without having some element of risk. And I think the first risk, in my opinion, that we take in life is that we know that we're all going to the same place. You know what I mean? At the end of it all, right?
Yeah.
And so the first risk is not to take the risk. You know what I mean?
That's a great insight.
Yeah.
That's 100% true.
We tend to forget that, and I think at the end of the day, just put yourself in a situation where everything will be fine. It's just a mental game. You've got support, right? Or if you can support if you can put yourselves and surround yourselves around the right people, you're definitely going to feel much better taking that risk than just going full steam ahead and for the dark. And you're not going to take a risk without taking it as calculated.
For sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And also I think it needs to be in your personality. Like for me, I perform a lot better under pressure. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I did a paramedicine degree, right?
That's so great.
And the reason why I did that is, I thought I wanted to be a heart surgeon and, being a guy that thinks this is what he wants to do, and your parents expect of you to do this and this. I did that because I work well under pressure and under adrenaline, and I can't be that type of person that sits back, does nothing, because I actually operate a lot worse in that point. And so I think going back to your point, around taking risks, yes, absolutely, they need to be calculated, no doubt about it, right? But I think the element of, the risk element around the pressure, I'm the kind of person that just operates better under that pressure.
Yeah, right. So are you saying that then there was pressure for you to go to uni and study something in the medical space? Or were you is that something that, an expectation you wanted to fulfill?
Yeah. So basically what happened was, when I was at school, also going, when I was 18, instead of finishing school, I was working at Telstra, doing enterprise and government sales, right? Wow. While I was finishing, schooling and all that kind of stuff. And funnily enough, I was working like 2-3 days a week, and I was getting better results than anyone in the country from a sales perspective.
Wow.
And while I was doing my degree as well, my medical degree, I'm like, oh shit, I think I'm pretty good at this. Even though I thought I wanted to be a heart surgeon, I'm pretty good at this sales thing, right? And so when I was working at Telstra, me and two guys at Telstra, they were both in their 40s. I was 18 at the time. On our lunch break, we would want to get a haircut, for example. And back then, apps were quite new. And so what we would do is you'd either have to call a hairdresser downstairs, and I was working in the city at the time, and wait on the phone when you know you've got an hour break on your lunch break. Or the second one is you go downstairs, need to find the right hairdresser to go to, number one. And when you find them, you have to either wait in line and then your lunch break goes and you end up walking out without even a haircut. So we found a gap, right? And that gap was booking beauty salons. And that led me to starting a company with these two guys who have very unique set of skills, where I was very good at sales. One of them was very good from a financial perspective, and one was very good from a technology perspective. And it was like that perfect storm. And so we ended up building a platform called Book Me A Salon, with the intention of essentially starting with the salon side and spa and all that kind of stuff, which was like almost like, think of a TripAdvisor, so reviews, etc., but you're able to book on the go wherever you are based on geolocation. Right?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So
what year is this? Sorry, Mark.
that would have been around 2011 or something like that.
Wow. So this was before the age of, all these tech, tech giants, pretty much, using the same idea where they're the middleman and they are tendering to, many others, independent vendors.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
I mean, imagine having to build an app today. It would cost you minimum 300K. Let's call it, right? Back then we paid
That's amazing.
nothing.
That's
right?
amazing.
And that's because apps were new and everyone wanted to get into that space, right? And so we built it, and we ended up selling the company to Zomato. As you probably know, Zomato is quite a big one.
That's massive.
Yeah, it was good, but we sold it really poorly just because we had some issues within the business. And we ended up sort of being forced to sell the business to some respect, very, very early stage. And then you wouldn't believe this, but 5 years later, 2 girls from Bondi came out with exactly the same business, which they raised funding on Shark Tank initially.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
they did. And then they ended up selling the business at like $200 million.
Wow.
And so this is where it's like, it's all about, business is all about, number one is timing, people, and the execution, a lot of it, right? And I think we lacked, unfortunately, the team based on what we thought we had the right team, but you live and learn by these experiences, and then you understand sort of who you need to partner with and what you need to partner with, and even though you don't see it coming, you then start seeing these red flags coming up later as you start learning these, going through these experiences. So that was interesting.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
$200 million. That's
so
a sum to cry over. Like, that's like, just looking at that, and I don't know what you must be thinking or what you were thinking at that time.
Yeah, look,
but like,
at the end of the day, it is what it is, and it's unfortunate, and everyone, when I tell this story, everyone's like, seriously, like, they're almost crying for me, right? But ultimately everything happens for a reason, and you live and learn. I think the biggest thing is, as long as you don't give up, and I'm happy to fail 100 times and succeed 101, right? I'll keep going until that happens. And so ultimately, for me, everything that happens in your life is a learning experience. You understand? Correct. And I'm all about finishing things, and if you get yourself into something, do it properly or don't do it at all.
Correct.
And seeing things to the end, which is a big issue a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with. They see the next best shiny thing and they leave that unfinished. I'm guilty of that 100%, like
for sure.
Don't they say it's like 90-something% of businesses fail within 5 years or something?
Yeah.
Like, isn't that
it's 1 out of 9 startups that will succeed.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm not surprised if it's due to someone giving up.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's so many different factors, and I also think it's not easy, and a lot, unfortunately, our generation wants it easy, a lot of the time. And I think the other issue, I know we're a bit off topic, but I think another issue is that there's a big focus problem at the moment because you've got so many social media platforms and you get dragged in so many different directions, especially when you're good at what you do, right? And it's very hard to sort of go, hold on a minute. I'm getting information from here. What's right, what's wrong? And going back to, okay, what am I actually trying to achieve?
Exactly.
And why am I doing what I'm doing? Right?
In the age of information, we're just blasted with all sorts of content and all sorts of right and wrong, information. And where do you draw the line between what's right and what's wrong?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one thing I definitely am focusing on at the moment is being present. I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of it. I put my hand up and sitting on the couch with my wife, for example, right? Like, we shouldn't be on our phones.
Yeah.
We get 1 hour today to spend together. It's the only hour we get to spend together. Put our phones away and it's more about the quality than the quantity.
Yeah,
and that's when I talk about the fact that we all have 24 hours a day. It's how you utilize your time.
What are you doing it? Yeah.
You know, and that's where I've got a very regimented sort of schedule.
Routine.
You know, where everything that I will do in that schedule will be done 110% and will be fully focused on that. You know,
100%.
and I think that's super important.
Yeah, no, that's a good insight, and I think you're right about being present. I think in this day and age, we are like what was discussed earlier. We're just blasted with the information left, right, and centre.
Yeah.
Where do you pause and think about just self-reflect, reflect on your own life rather than who's sold this company for this much or what the share price of this stock is doing, who's buying what. I think you're right about you need to sort of disconnect and be present, and that can be with your family sometimes. Sometimes you need to reconnect with yourself.
Yeah,
and that's a big thing.
Very important.
Yeah. We get lost in the go of life. And
for sure.
Busyness of life.
For sure.
It's really important.
And you need to have that one thing that you focus on that gives you that break, where you can sort of switch off and do what you need to do. And for me, it's exercise, right? Like, I'm up by 5 o'clock, 5:30. I'm at the gym doing usually majority of the time cardio in the morning. I know you say I'm buff, but I'm into my cardio at the moment. So I think for me, it's like
shred.
Yeah, exactly. And I just find that time efficiency is everything.
Yeah.
And I'm always doing something that moves me forward every single day.
Yeah.
That will compound, as we know, right? With my time. So if I'm on the treadmill, for example, I'm watching a podcast from someone who's the best of the best in the area that I'm looking to expand on and looking to improve myself on.
Yeah.
While I'm doing that run,
rather
than listening to music, for example.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I like you said that because you said it's compounding effect.
It does.
Sometimes we go, it's really interesting, like we go through phases like, oh, that's it. I'm so motivated the next 6 weeks. I'm going to, watch these podcasts. I'm going to set goals and then after 6 weeks, what happens is you celebrate because you achieved 6 weeks and then
see you later.
Start from
Yeah.
But imagine if you do that for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and then, ongoing for years, 10 years, 15 years.
It's a habit. It becomes a habit.
Yeah. What does that look like?
Yeah. It's huge. I mean, like for me now, I'm almost programmed in a way. It sounds ridiculous, but unless I work out in the morning, I may as well not do anything today, because it's just going to be a write-off. And so I'm so programmed now because I started so early is, need to get to the gym because he makes me feel good, right? And do that workout because that's my priority for me. I'm prioritizing me. And I know it sounds a bit selfish, but a lot of the time now, especially when you have a family and all that, unfortunately, fortunately, they become a priority, right? And other things become a priority and there's other things to consider. But I think it's always important to come back to, unless you're becoming better every day and becoming the best version of yourself, right? How the hell are you meant to have that impact on other people?
Exactly. How do you serve others?
Yeah, you can't serve others.
Don't serve yourself.
And I think it sounds a bit selfish, but ultimately, yes, the world is about serving others. Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. And in fact, I think there will be a lot more inflow when you start serving others. But you need to learn how to serve yourself before you can know how to serve others.
Right. Right.
And I think that's super important.
If you've got the right mind, the right heart, then you will serve others if you look after yourself first.
Absolutely. And I think you spoke about mind. Like mind for me, mindset is everything. Unless you've got the right mindset, you can teach skills. When you employ employees, I think we had this discussion the other day. You can teach skills. You can't teach personality.
Yeah.
You can't teach the mindset a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important.
Yeah, 100%. All right, Michael, let's shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about, you spoke a little bit about Book Me A Salon.
Yeah.
How old were you when you sold it? 21?
About 21, yeah.
21, awesome. And what did you do right after Book Me A Salon? You're free or you're at uni at this stage.
Yeah.
What did you do right after?
So because I finished my healthcare degree and I actually recognized that I was quite good at selling, I'm like, why don't I look into maybe combining the two, right?
Yeah.
And so what happened was I had a few friends in the pharmaceutical medical space And I'm like, okay, this sounds a bit interesting because I didn't want to let go of my healthcare knowledge and I knew that I was going to sell, so I wanted to combine the two. And so I started working with medical device / consumable companies, selling into hospitals, aged care, primary care, etc. And, you know, I was fairly young at the time. And so for someone to get a job, it was a very hard market to crack into.
Yeah.
And eventually after, you know, numerous goes, I got in. And for someone that young to get in was very unusual. And I used to go to like big conferences and events, and everyone around me would be in their 40s, and they'd look at me like, who's this young guy sort of thing, right?
Inexperienced.
Yeah. But like, you know, I was making like 200 grand in cash, and, you know, I was as flexible as ever. Like I was working probably, you know, hopefully the old bosses don't see this, but you know, you're working about like max 30 hours a week at best case, you know what I mean? Wow. And so it was very flexible. I could do things when I want, how I want. Never had to be in an office space. You know, I've ran my own schedule very young, making very, very good money, you know? And I did that for about 2-3 years. And I'm like, this just feels way too comfortable for someone at my age.
And wait, you're talking $200,000
Yeah.
and that's too comfortable.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm comfortable, I'm making good money, I'm flexible, I can do whatever I want, when I want, how I want, you know.
As a 21-year-old, that gets to your head.
Yeah, and I'm like,
you think you're on top of the world.
I'm way too laid back here. You know, like this is too comfortable, this just doesn't feel right. You're in a small fish in a big corporate, being a very comfortable guy. And I'm like, I'm very comfortable. So then I started thinking about what's my next move. And, you know, long story short, I was thinking, because I had a bit of experience now, built a lot of relationships in the healthcare space, why don't I start a medical distribution company? So I don't know if you know, but being from Israel is very innovative when it comes to healthcare and other startups and so forth and so on. Yeah. And so I actually approached a contact of mine out of Israel who was a CEO of a 50,000 employee company. He was on the board, and you know, he's a shark, right? This guy in his 50s. And long story short, I heard that he was coming to Australia. And so I caught up with him with the intention of trying to leverage off his network to bring medical devices from Israel and start a distribution company. And one thing led to another. We started talking. He goes, look, unfortunately, I don't have the right contact for you, but I was brought here by a high net worth family here in Australia to commercialize a buy now, pay later product. And I said, this is before buy now, pay later was a thing. No one knew about it. It didn't even exist, right? Started telling me about it, and I'm like, listen, I'm not interested. I want to start my own company. You know, I'm looking for my next break. And so one thing led to another. I almost sort of like, you know, thought, okay, because I know his caliber and who he is, why don't I hear him out? Let's see what happens, right? One thing led to another. He asked me to present what I see the opportunity for this company, both within the healthcare space, but in the market. And so I put together like a presentation. I'm like, you know what, I'll do it. I'll present the buy now, pay later product, yeah. So I walked into 120 Collins Street, level 40, this boardroom with like the best view I've ever seen. It was awesome. I'll never forget it, right? Being this like 23, 24-year-old walking into this, you know, boardroom with some of the highest net worth families in Australia. And I'm like, shit, I've seen this guy on the news. I've seen this guy on this and that. And I'm in front of them presenting what I think is the opportunity for them. Presented, and they wouldn't let me walk out until we had a deal on the table. And I joined that company. At the time it was called Jam Payments, but then became OpenPay as about the 15th employee. And we scaled that business to about 250 employees within 2.5 years. You know, with global expansion into the UK, US, which then we IPO'd the business and it became public.
That's incredible.
And so that was an awesome experience because it was almost like, you know, having these people's money, cash, to be able to do what you need to do to grow this business. And so came up with a go-to-market strategy, executed on the strategy, and learned a shitload of experience.
Wow.
I want to go back a sec. So you walked into that boardroom.
Yeah.
With like all these high net worth, you know, people.
Yeah. Looking at me like, who's this kid?
Were you shaking? Were you sweating? Like.
Yeah, look, I think you're always gonna have that nerve inside you, especially this early stage. But like, at the end of the day, at that time, I was sort of like, am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? And I'm like, look, I planned it out. I put in my homework. Let's do it. Because I wasn't interested in coming on board at the time, I'm like, whatever, I'm almost like doing this guy a favor that I'm coming to some respect, as much as he's doing me a favor that he's about to put me through one of my best experiences in my life, right? Walked in, of course you're gonna be nervous, presented fairly well, and obviously the outcome of that was that I joined the company. But I tell you what, to be able to surround yourself on a very regular basis with some very influential people that have had some great success in their life taught me big lessons.
Yeah.
And so, yes, to answer your question, of course I was nervous.
That's insane. That's
Yeah.
insane. It's so crazy how you might think, just when you look back at it from a helicopter view, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at it and you're thinking, this is not the meeting that I wanted.
Yeah.
You wanted another meeting through the contact that you were trying to get in touch with.
That's right.
But then they threw you in this BNPL space. And then now you're like, whoa, I'm in front of all these, big names.
Yeah.
And, how long were you at OpenPay?
I was about 2.5 years or so.
Wow.
And, one of those things like that I want to mention is, even though I was hesitant to join the business, right? I actually joined that business because of the people that were involved in the business.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think that's something that's super important, especially at later stage when you start investing in companies, is you back people a lot of the time. 99% of the success of the business will be on the people, not the idea.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh, I've got this idea, it's great, it's gonna be this. I can give you 1,000 ideas tomorrow, right? It won't succeed if the right people are not behind that business.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So, reason why I joined that business is because of the people that were involved. And I'm glad that's the reason I joined, and it made me realize how much I've learned from those type of people.
Yeah, that's a massive insight that you've had. And, I just want to touch on, remember how you were saying that at 21 to 23, you were earning big money.
Yeah.
It's easy to sort of look over them
Yeah.
or look over those big names and you're like, oh, I'm better than them. Oh,
Yeah.
what were they doing at 23? Were they
Yeah.
like me? It's easy to get sort of complacent
Absolutely.
with that. So
Yeah.
that's a big insight.
Yeah, I think no matter where you get to, you're always learning, and don't ever think you know it all, because you don't, and there's always other people that know more, okay? That's it.
Yeah.
And ultimately it comes down to leveraging of the fact that you're open to suggestions. And that, I think, in itself creates a successful framework, to how you run your business. If you pretend you know everything and know everything, you'll fail pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But if you bring the best of the best, into the business that and you're confident you can trust and you can, learn off, then you'll do well. We brought an ex-Uber into OpenPay, right?
Wow.
Marketing. She was a gun, and it's all about who you bring into the business.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. And those big unicorn companies, they're something to really, they've got such a massive impact on one's resume.
For sure.
When you say you worked at OpenPay or at Uber, it's just damn, that, you're of high caliber.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think hyper growth is super challenging, and it's exactly what we had. We rode a wave. It was hyper growth. As you know, Afterpay did extremely well. And we sort of competed with them. And so I think that gave us an advantage to some respect.
Yeah.
But, going through that hyper growth experience, there's so many hats you have to wear.
Yeah.
And so many moving pieces. And ultimately, I think one thing I've learned from fairly successful people is that focus your attention on stuff that's going wrong in the business and 90% of your time than what's going right in the business. Because then if you can turn that around very quickly, you'll succeed,
Yeah.
And there's so much I can tell you about that business that I learned from. And, it's from where it went to see it grow to where it is and what it's now become. It's awesome. Awesome experience,
Yeah.
So how does OpenPay now compare with Afterpay?
Good question. So there's so many buy now, pay later players now. It's like saturated market, as you know, becoming regulated and all that kind of stuff. But Afterpay essentially is paying for, okay? And what they did really well is target millennials, 18 to 25-year-olds, and they went online straight away, okay? Whereas we were more like risk averse, right? In the sense that we target more asset-rich, cash flow poor demographic.
Okay.
They were sort of like in their 30s, so So they had property, they had cars, they had kids, etc. So we knew that it reduces our risk, right? But what we did really well is that we capitalized on the fact that we lended over a larger period of time, and we lend at a larger capacity.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you've got the likes of Zip, for example, who's a credit license product, for example, right? So they lend big, but also over a long period of time. But it's a much more friction experience, whereas we create a much more frictionless experience, which Afterpay really nailed as well.
Yeah.
But I think that's where we're sort of like, where that middle person is like, all right, we're more like towards the Afterpay with longer terms and higher values. And we were across multiple verticals as well.
Right. Yeah.
So we put the customer in the middle essentially and go, all right, well, we know the customer needs to go to the dentist, doctor. We know the customer needs to take the car for a service, okay? We know the customer needs to, shops online for shoes and blah, 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 blah. And we know the customer goes to Bunnings to buy a chair, etc., right?
Yeah.
So why don't we put the customer in the middle and then consolidate everything for them?
Well, what is usual now is you'll have, all these retailers and service-based businesses with all types of BNPL options.
Correct.
So if you want to pay in full, you can go with Afterpay.
Yeah.
If you want to pay over 3 months, you can go with ZipPay or whatever it may be. So, it's really interesting to see that suppliers or service suppliers and retailers are doing, are accommodating for all types of people with all different types of, financial situations. So it's really interesting.
Because I think you have to these days, right? People have so many different options these days of where they shop, whether it's online, whether it's in store, who they pay with, etc. So you have to, unless you're a store that gives people the option, you might miss out on business, right? And, let's say, for example, you're someone who doesn't have OpenPay and have Afterpay, at least you've got the option there. One thing definitely we struggled with in the business is getting utilization. So we were signing amazing contracts, big deals, etc. But how do you educate the market and get people to use your product? And becoming another payment option where you had Visa, MasterCard, and then all of a sudden OpenPay really allowed us to get utilization up, and adoption.
Yeah, that's such an interesting insight. What role did you play in the OpenPay? Like after they sort of, got you on board, what role did you sort of fill?
Yeah, I think the first part was coming up with a strategy around the growth strategy. And I was very fortunate to have a very good mentor who was the Chief Revenue Officer at the time. And as I knew the chairman and our CEO of the business at the time very well, we collectively came together and worked through the go-to-market strategy and had to execute on that strategy. And then ultimately build teams and, and so even though the business started really early and really small, I had to sort of wear multiple hats at the start, from both business development / to execution on strategy / all these kind of things. And that's when opportunities came in within the business, and ultimately, you sort of narrow it down to what you're good at, So essentially, it was coming up with a go-to-market strategy and executing on that strategy successfully, pivoting and doing what you need to do, which then gave me the skill set to be able to then advise to other people on how to do that, because I've done it multiple times successfully. I'm like, oh shit, I might be okay at this, And so, you test and run, and that's what I'm doing now. Is a lot of the time is understanding what a business is doing, what it's trying to achieve, and how we get them there. And and we do it based on the strategy that we've come up with.
That's amazing, man. And it's so good to see that you're only 30 and you have this immense amount of experience that is just you can keep talking about it for for a long time.
And I think the fact that I'm only getting started.
That's the mentality. That's the mentality. So many people at 30, they go, oh, that's you, I'm getting old. But I don't feel that from you. I feel like you're still, a 19-year-old, mature, that's hungry, that's fire.
Absolutely. It's funny when I talk, when I close these large deals or I talk to people, they're like, there's no way you're 30 years old. They think I'm older, right? Because there's so much experience there. And that's purely because I started early. And I started doing things early, and I've experimented with so many different things where you get people, you know, they go to university, start a job, stay in their job for, you know, and that's all they do. But it's like, would you marry the first girl you're with? No. Majority of the time not, right? Because you need to make sure it's the right person for you. Same thing with a passion or same thing with a business or the same thing with a thing. You need to touch multiple things to understand what you're good at, number one, and then really amplify what you're good at, you know? Yeah. And I'm very fortunate to have been able to do that and be in a position to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I like how you said, would you marry the first girl you meet? It's like, sometimes we forget about that in business.
Yeah.
You know, like we're very cautious about our relationships.
Yeah.
But then business, like that first business has to succeed.
Yeah.
And we get so cut because it doesn't.
Yeah. I think if you go into it with the mentality of like, you know, I'm going to do my best here and there's no plan B and this is it. I'm going all in and I'm doing it properly. And you know what? If you fail, you get up and you do something even better. Then you'll succeed because you're always continuing to strive for more. And I think going back to that daily improvement of self-improvement, but also, you know, it'll improve you, eventually it'll compound, right? And the earlier you start, the better it is, in my opinion, you know? I always say to myself, I almost wish I started earlier, you know? And that's because, you know, it compounds. And I think as long as you wake up every morning and you're like, okay, did I learn something new, number one? Did I improve myself in this area of my life, whether it's fitness, whether it's love, whether it's finances, whether it's business, whatever it is, if you know you've at least ticked a box in every area, then ultimately you're going to be moving in the right direction, you know? And I think as long as you do that, that's the most important part. That's the fulfillment part, you know? Yeah.
Let's move on from OpenPay and what you've learned from that. And I want to know what you've done right after. So it seemed like, it looks like you're very, you know, go from, you know, stage to stage to stage, and there's no sort of in between, which is like amazing. You know, a lot of people will sort of finish up a thing in their life or, you know, whatever it may be, and you're right into the next thing straight away. Now you have all these great connections, you know, high net worth families, you know, big CEOs and CROs and etc. What's Michael doing right after OpenPay, and you know, where's he going?
Yeah, sure. I actually tried to work on like a business. We had an algorithm that essentially plugs into like hospital system that allows you to for doctors to prescribe a drug, for example, and not make the drug mistake. Because a lot of doctors, as you know, they're fatigued and they, you know, and what we did was we created an algorithm that allows you to find outliers in the mistakes that a doctor would make.
Really?
And we tried to pilot that with a hospital, okay? And unfortunately,
who's we at this stage?
Me and another guy that I partner with, who worked for a big medical distribution company.
Yeah, right.
And we had a hospital that agreed to pilot it, but literally a month later or 2 months later or something, COVID hit. And so ultimately, it was very recent. And so when I left OpenPay at the time, and so what happened was, not long after, because of COVID hit, they prioritized other project, of course. And so we ended up sort of letting that go. And then I needed to make some money. So I went into a medical sales role selling devices to orthopedic surgeons until I find my next thing, right? And what happened was after that is recently, I actually, believe it or not, applied for a VC fund or an accelerator program with a company called Antler. So it's like your Y Combinator of the world, big in the VC space and in the startup landscape. And usually like 30 applicants out of something like 5,000 get accepted. And I was very fortunate enough to get accepted into the program to try and develop a product, right? Which we were working on, and unfortunately we didn't get funded. However, it leads me to where I am today, and that's working through a new project that I'm very excited about, you know, that we're looking to open a raise soon to amplify the product in the sustainability space.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So it's just where, you know, where one door closes, another 50 open, and you know, you get spoiled for choice where you're like, should I go down this route or that?
Yeah.
Because of, you know, your experience and your connection. So
exactly.
tell us a little bit about the project that you're working on.
For sure. So firstly, I want to say third time lucky, hopefully.
Yeah. It's gonna
We'll be lucky, don't worry.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Manifest it.
Absolutely. We're working through that. So very exciting project in the sustainability space. As you probably know, sustainability is a very hot topic at the moment.
Absolutely.
And there's a very, very big agenda to 2030 and to 2050 to reduce carbon emission, right?
No.
You know, that's through like EV cars, whether, you know, items in your household, etc., etc. I've been very fortunate to meet a founder who founded a company called Baresop. And that's basically a sustainability company that produces products within the household, within personal hygiene. And so some of the products, for example, we've got hand soap that basically has a powder. So you buy the bottle once, you fill it up with a sachet of hand soap, and then you just keep refilling it with sachets on like a subscription model. And what that does is, number one is, I don't know if you know, but hand soap and body soap, 90% of it is water. And so imagine all that shipping in shipping containers of 90% of bottles are being water, how much CO2 is going to the environment from that just alone, right? And let's not forget the whole logistics side of it and the supply chain of it, of, you know, what we're actually, the big impact we're gonna have on the environment with this product and this company. We've got a very big mission, and that mission is to basically reduce 1 billion plastic bottles from landfills by 2035.
What a mission.
And that will save 50,000 tonne of emission,
Wow.
right? Which is huge.
Wow.
That's intense.
Yeah,
And
so
there's
it's
a lot
massive
of
mission.
weight on your shoulders.
It is a lot of weight.
Yeah. And why is it that this particular company or mission or purpose attracted you to sort of, you know, go down that route?
Yeah, good question. I think a few things, right? Number one, when I look at businesses, I think timing is number one, right? And we know that there's an agenda here. And so I think timing is pretty good for the business. Second thing is, I think, I think number one is the fact that I'm looking to build something that will last beyond my lifetime, right? And will make an impact, not just for business, but also in the world, you know? And I think being able to really say that this is gonna do it is an awesome story that we can hopefully nail, is what we're working through. But I also think the original founder is, you know, so passionate, and the story is so ripe. And what she's been able to achieve over the past 12 months needs to be amplified. And it needs to be amplified now very quickly. And so I'm coming together as almost like a secondary founder / chief commercial officer to really amplify that message and bring in innovation to be able to get to our North Star of 1 billion bottles, right? And that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
And it's an exciting challenge that I have a good feeling about. Let's just say, like you have a good feeling about all other businesses.
Yeah,
but, you know, so that's what we're working through now, and we'll be working through for quite some time now. We're looking to open a raise of funding. So again, for those that don't know, in the venture capital space, we're looking to raise some funds to be able to execute on our plan. The business doing well at the moment, and now it's all about really just amplifying on a global scale. So there's big plans to hit some global markets, which is very exciting.
Didn't you guys just recently, I don't know if you can say it on a camera, but recently closed a really good deal with Baresop and someone else?
Yeah, so we, a few deals actually. So number one is, it's a company that's been backed by a pretty big VC fund. I won't mention exactly, but it's a big one. And secondary to that is we've managed to do some great deals with the likes of Woolies, for example. So we're with Woolies Online, Temple & Webster, which is a big one.
That's awesome.
You know, some big sort of brands that are starting to really, you know,
Recognize them.
Yeah, recognize us, which is super cool, right? Because we've been able to organically grow, and, you know, unlike a lot of other businesses similar, a lot of the time the product's manufactured overseas. You know, they do a great job from a marketing perspective, but people don't actually love the experience, right? With us, I actually think it's the other way around.
Yeah.
You know, you look at the brand, you get a feeling for the brand, and you're like, I love this thing. right? Now it's all about amplifying that message globally and making a big impact. And so that's what I'm excited about. The fact that the product is manufactured here in Melbourne is another advantage that we have, you know, because we're able to move a lot quicker than some of the others.
And it's just a selling point as well. People love stuff that are made here.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Particularly if it's something that's going to be on their skin and their body. You know, it's better to, you know, make it here.
Exactly, absolutely. We've got a patent on the technology, so, you know, by the way, particularly for that VC fund that backed us, you know, they predominantly back tech businesses. And so for them to back us and our story is that...
It's a big deal.
It's a massive deal, right? Because the way we make the powder and the process that we go through is through technology.
Yeah.
And we will be introducing more technologies to get to our North Star because we know that we need to be able to reach more people around the world, you know? And so I'm super excited about what's to come. We're in discussions with some big players. I can't disclose too much. And I feel like we're moving in the right direction. So that's certainly a focus for me. And yeah, let's see what happens with that, right?
So exciting.
Yeah.
Honestly, we've been following Baresop for some time now, and we're very excited to sort of, you know, see where it's going.
Yeah.
Especially because it's solving a very unknown problem.
Yeah.
Like, it was news to me when you told me that, you know, in bottles, or soap bottles anyway, 90% of them are water. And not only that, they're you know, rarely recycled properly, which is a double, you know, double whammy, literally. Like it's you know, I don't know the measure of the impact, but it's insane to just think about the gigaliters essentially of just, you know, what we call a soap, which is 90% water, which could just be done locally.
Correct.
You know.
And how do you feel as a consumer, number one, paying for something that's 90% water? And you're paying a premium.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And what's really interesting is that that's all added weight, which costs more for shipping and all that, you know. So it's just, you can reduce your costs so much more and sell the product.
From the consumer perspective, and then from a supply chain perspective, you can save thousands and thousands of dollars on shipping, and, you know, and and you know, and other aspects of the supply chain, which is insane.
And I think what excites me most is, you know, I think we'll have fun along the journey, and I also think that we're making a global impact. That you know, like I've got kids now, right? And so to have kids that grow up beyond my time and their kids and so forth, we need to really protect the world, right? Otherwise, it won't be here, you know? And so I think...
It's the only place we got, pretty much.
Exactly. And I don't think people realize at what rate we're impacting the globe in a very negative way. People are not realizing, like the individual people and consumers. And so unless we do something about it, little or big now, we're in big trouble. And there's no way to reverse this a lot of the time, as we probably know, right? And so this is us playing our part in that journey.
Exactly right. Exactly right. All right, I'm going to sort of move on from Baresop. And I want to sort of shift gears a little bit, and you know, you've been in the share market and investing for a while. You know, give me, and you know a bit about it, the share market. What is happening currently, and what do you see? What insights can you sort of make out of that?
I think the biggest thing is we all know that inflation rate is pretty high at the moment, right? Like, I mean, the UK came out with a stat saying inflation rate sitting at 9%, right? So what that means is that your money sitting in the bank is losing 9% a year. Now, if you've got a bit of money, that's a lot of money. Okay? And so ultimately, unless you invest your cash somewhere, you're in a bit of trouble. And you're going backwards, not forwards. And, you know, I think what's happening now when you look at company valuations, they've peaked. And we realized that valuations were just ridiculous. They're throwing valuations of ridiculous prices, and companies are way overvalued. And properties are way overvalued, and everything is overvalued. And the fact that everything is going to is now costing more, and money's becoming less valuable. what do you do?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And me myself, I'm trying to figure this out myself.
Yeah.
And so I've spent years learning some of the best financial minds in the world, including Ray Dalio, Tony Robbins, those type of guys. And I think for me is, how do we hedge against inflation, number one? And then number two, how do you make sure that you protect yourself and proof yourself from a recession?
Yeah.
Because let's say you've built a decent wealth and continue to do so, how do you make sure that doesn't come crashing down?
Yeah.
I mean, for a 30-year-old, you could probably recover.
Yeah.
Right? But for a 50 or 60-year-old who's retired and he's got like 2 million in the bank or whatever it might be, that's a big problem if tomorrow that turns to 200 grand.
Yeah.
You're never going to make that back.
No.
And so I think the biggest thing that I'm getting out of it is that asset allocation is probably the most important thing at the moment. Is how do you diversify really well to make sure that, God forbid, there's a recession, which if you look at the history, it seems like we're going this way, right? How do you protect yourself from, instead of going to like 50% losses, to potentially a loss of 3%?
Yeah. COVID was a lesson for us, right?
It was massive.
Because, imagine if you were selling just at a brick and mortar store.
Yeah.
What happened to you?
Exactly.
If you didn't have, and there's someone that I know that has multiple businesses, and his construction business was hit.
Yeah.
But then, he said, just a small loss, just because he's got so many other online, businesses.
Yeah.
Diversification is key.
Diversification, asset allocation, protect yourself. It's like you're going into like almost, you have to go to some respect almost to like a survival mode, but it's also going to be a once in a lifetime, in my opinion, opportunity to capitalize on that,
Yeah.
And I think it's going to create this gap of, the poor become poorer, the middle class potentially gets wiped out, and the rich become even richer, because it's going to create a lot of opportunities. And I think opportunities, as you probably guys know, is, they come across our desks every day, and there's opportunities everywhere. How do you make sure you capitalize on the right ones?
Exactly. Correct.
And that's through experience and learning from those people that have done it.
Yeah. But you know what the issue is though? Big institutions are not really supporting in that, and they are, like for example, Westpac the other day released a high interest bank account,
right?
And it's a 0.65%.
That's high interest
like
rate.
That's what they consider high
Wow.
interest rate. That's the offer.
Yeah.
It's just like, what the hell is happening at the moment?
It's madness.
We used to be like 3%, which is quite high. Was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And if you found the 3%, you're
That's
very
right.
lucky. But now, look where the standards have gone.
Yeah.
Look how low the standards have gone.
It's a cycle. You look at the days where interest rates were at 20% beyond our time. Back then, and it's like, okay, if you had money in the bank, fantastic, right? But how do you afford a property?
Yeah.
And then you've got this cycle of, rates are the lowest they've ever been.
Yeah.
Right? The Fed's printing money like no tomorrow and continuing to inject the cash. That's got to have to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, it's us who pay.
Correct.
Like, for the cost of that. So.
Absolutely, and it's our kids that will pay, and I think you've just got to be very smart with what you do, and I think it comes in waves, right?
Yeah.
It's like you live in, just like the seasons, right? You've got winter, summer, etc. This is almost like the winter where you need to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And you come better on the other side,
Exactly.
and that's the way I see it. And interesting times, interesting
That's
times.
life. That's the reality.
It's exciting in a way, because you can capitalize if you know how to, and hopefully we do, Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for coming along, Michael. You've really shared a lot of wisdom with us today. And it's so good to hear your story and experience.
100%,
And like, we don't get to talk to someone with as much experience as you, and we're just looking forward to seeing what's next for you.
Awesome.
I keep saying you're only 30. What the hell is coming on? Like, what's next for you, man? It's just so exciting to to see what you're working on next.
Awesome.
And,
I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
I appreciate your
Michael.
time. I'm looking forward to the next 10 years, and the fact
That's
that
it.
we
And the
sharing
fact that we're
offers,
working together as well.
It's exciting.
You know, that's
very
really exciting.
I think there's a big future ahead for everyone, and I think as long as
100%.
we keep pushing forward every single day, that will compound, and it will make a big difference. So thanks, appreciate you guys having me on board.
Thank you so
Appreciate it.
much for your
I'm
time.
looking forward to working with you guys, boys.
Likewise.
Us too. Thanks, Michael. Cheers, everyone. Have a good day.